The wind whispers through the streets of Tulsa, carrying with it the sickly scent of buttery popcorn and cotton candy. The fair is back, bringing with it its vibrant lights and the soundtrack of children's laughter mixed with the mechanical hum of the spinning rides. But beneath this facade of joy, something dark lurks. The first to notice is Maggie Harper, a maintenance worker for the rides. As she cleans the mirror on the carousel, she sees a reflection that shouldn't be there. A tall, pale figure with eyes as deep as black holes, watching her from the other side. But there's something more, a distant whisper, almost a muffled laugh, sending chills down her spine. When she turns, the figure is gone. That very night, a boy named Ethan Moore vanishes without a trace. The only clue, his younger brother, Toby, swears he saw a funny man holding a red balloon, whispering sweet words to Ethan before disappearing into the darkness between the tents. As the search begins, rumors spread. Veteran fair workers whisper about Grimley, the clown who was never found. Some say he was wrongfully killed, others claim a dark pact brought him back. But one thing they all agree on: he's back to take what was taken from him. Can you feel it? The sweet smell of cotton candy, the distant sound of a laugh. Someone is watching. The fair has come to town once again, and with it the echoes of a show that was never meant to exist. They say Grimley is gone. They say it was just a legend, but if you look too deeply into the mirror, if you hear a laugh that shouldn't be there, you might end up becoming part of the show. The question is, will you have the courage to look into the mirror, or will the mirror look back at you first? Prepare yourself for a story that will haunt your nightmares. Read now and find out if you can escape the fair before the show begins. The amusement park stretched across a vast lot, lit by colorful lights that flickered erratically as though something were interfering with the electricity. Tulsa was buzzing with excitement over the return of the century-old fair, an event that, according to the organizers, would bring nostalgia and magic for all ages. But for some of the older residents, the fair's return stirred up bad memories and fear. Maggie Harper, 32, moved between the rides, checking to make sure everything was working properly. She had worked in maintenance for 5 years, and although she loved what she did, she always felt a strange chill when passing by the old carousel. There was something about it that made her uneasy. The wooden horses seemed to stare at her. That night, as she was scrubbing one of the mirrors on the attraction, her eyes caught a strange movement. A tall figure, dressed in faded clown clothes, stood right behind her. The air shifted, a heavy, damp odor, like clothes that had been stored away for too long. She spun around. Nothing. Only the horses creaking in their posts, going up and down as if mocking her unease. A low, hoarse laugh echoed from within the mirror, but Maggie convinced herself it was just her imagination playing tricks. Meanwhile, Ethan Moore and his younger brother Toby ran between the stalls. Their parents were busy arguing over which snack to buy, and the boys took the opportunity to explore. It was then that Toby stopped suddenly, gripping his brother's arm tightly. Ethan. That man over there. Ethan followed the trembling finger of his brother. At the end of the row of tents, a shadow stood out among the flickering lights. A thin man, wearing a grimy clown suit and a crooked top hat, stared at them without blinking. His eyes were too dark, deep, hollow, like open holes in his pale face. The man raised one of his skeletal hands and extended a red balloon toward Ethan. Without realizing it, the boy stepped forward. "Ethan, no!" Toby shouted, pulling him back. The man smiled, but his smile was wrong, too wide, too full, and then, as if he had never been there, he disappeared. That very night, Ethan vanished without a trace. His frantic parents ran through the fair, calling his name. The only one who saw anything was Toby, and no one believed him, but Maggie believed. Because at that very moment, in the carousel mirror, Grimley was still there, and he was smiling. The fair was supposed to be a place of joy, but that night, fear hung in the air like a thick fog. Ethan Moore was missing, and although the organizers tried to downplay the situation, everyone knew something was wrong. The police began their search, with search dogs scouring the park, but there was no sign of the boy. Only one disturbing detail was found near the carousel: a small red clown nose covered in dirt. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was watching her. In the following days, the fair began to change. The lights flickered for no reason. The sounds of the attractions malfunctioned. Some children claimed to hear laughter even when no one was around. Then the nightmares began. First, it was Toby. He woke up screaming in the middle of the night, trembling and crying. When his parents entered the room, they found him curled up in the corner of his bed, whispering softly, "He was here. The funny man was under my bed." They turned on the light. Nothing was there, only a red balloon tied to the ceiling. Maggie decided to investigate. Searching through old city records, she found a news article from 1923. Fair worker mysteriously disappears after accusations of horrible crimes. Body never found. His name? Grimley. The article mentioned that he was a popular clown at the fair, but a group of fair workers accused him of committing terrible crimes against children and decided to take justice into their own hands. They beat him to death and buried his body under the carousel. But Grimley wasn't dead when they threw him. There, with his last breath, he whispered a curse, and now he wanted everyone to know. Night fell over Tulsa like a black veil, and the fair, once vibrant, now looked like a corpse illuminated by flickering lights. The search for Ethan continued without success, but something worse began to happen. More children were disappearing. First, it was Lucy, 7 years old, then Brandon, all last seen near the carousel, and always a red balloon left behind. Maggie Harper felt she was on the verge of discovering something terrible. Ever since she found the article about Grimley, she had been dreaming about him every night. In the dreams, Grimley whispered, twisted words, muffled by laughter that seemed to come from underwater. But that night, Maggie finally heard him clearly. "They laughed at me. Now they will laugh with me. Forever." She woke up with a scream caught in her throat. The room was freezing. The window, which she remembered locking, was open, and on the windowsill a red clown nose covered in dirt. Despair took over her. This was no longer a distant haunting. It was getting closer. She decided to seek out Albert Simmons, a 90-year-old former fair worker who had worked at the fair in 1923. The man lived in seclusion, but when Maggie mentioned the name Grimley, his face melted into pure terror. "He's back, isn't he?" Albert's voice trembled. Maggie nodded. The elderly man closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, as though reliving a nightmare buried for decades. "We killed him, and now he wants to have the last laugh." Albert told her the truth. Grimley was a solitary man, ridiculed even by the other performers at the fair. Accused without evidence of horrific crimes against children, a group of fair workers took justice into their own hands. They beat him until he stopped moving. But Grimly didn't die there. When they realized he was still breathing, terrified of what they had done, they decided to bury him alive under the carousel. But before the earth covered him completely, Grimly whispered one last time, "The fair will never end." And now he was keeping his promise. Panic took over the city. Desperate parents searched for their children. The fair workers shut their tents. The police had no answers, but Maggie knew where to look. If Grimly was tied to the carousel, that was where she would find the missing children, and that night she went there alone. The cold wind sliced through Maggie Harper's skin as she approached the carousel. The park was closed, but the music from the ride still played, distorted, as if something was trying to play one last song for an invisible audience. The lights flickered violently. Her footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Maggie stopped in front of the carousel's mirror, and this time, Grimly was there. But he wasn't standing still. He smiled. The carousel began to spin on its own. The horses moved. Their eyes, once simple faded paintings, now gleamed as if they had life. And then the children appeared. Small, pale shadows emerged from the darkness. Ethan, Lucy, Brandon, they were all there, but something was wrong. Their eyes were empty. Their mouths were smiling, but not truly. They were trapped. Maggie tried to speak, but her body froze. Then one of them raised a trembling hand and pointed behind her. Maggie slowly turned, and Grimly was there. But now, he didn't seem like just a man. His body was a twisted shell of pale, distorted skin, his clothes filthy and fused to his flesh, and his mouth. It was too wide for a human face. "The show is about to begin." His voice was both a whisper and a thunderclap at the same time. Maggie tried to run, but the children's hands held her, not with violence, but with pleading. Their eyes begged for help, but their smiles wouldn't let them scream. "Don't you understand, Maggie?" Grimly laughed. "They're part of my show now, and now so are you." Grimly's laughter merged with the wind. The shadows grew, and the circus appeared. Maggie blinked, and suddenly she was no longer at the fair. Now she stood in a circus that should not exist. The ring was lit by cold torches, flickering in a bluish glow. The stands were full, but the audience didn't move. They were shadows, specters frozen in time, and right in the center of the stage, under a ghostly spotlight. Grimly waited. The children were there, dressed as little clowns, their faces frozen in expressions of sickly happiness. But their eyes screamed, "You can free them, Maggie." Grimly walked toward her. "But everything has a price." She knew what he wanted. He wanted a replacement. "If I agree, will you let them go?" Her voice trembled. Grimly laughed, but this time the laughter sounded sad. "Do you really believe I have a choice?" The truth hit Maggie like a crushing weight. Grimly wasn't the director of the show. He was just the first prisoner. And now, he wanted Maggie to be the last. The audience leaned forward. The shadows' eyes gleamed. The show needed an ending. And then Maggie ran to the center of the ring. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice echoed through the emptiness, "the show is over." The light exploded and the circus crumbled. The blinding light consumed everything. For a moment, Maggie felt as though she were falling into an infinite void, swallowed by the circus itself. Grimly's laughter swirled with the wind, spinning around her like a haunted melody. And then, silence. Maggie opened her eyes. The Tulsa Fair was back. The carousel in front of her was still. The lights were off. The air was cold, but the suffocating presence that had engulfed the park had vanished. And then a soft sob caught her attention. She turned slowly. The children were there. Ethan, Lucy, Brandon, all those who had disappeared alive, lying on the ground, gasping for air, as if they had just woken from a deep nightmare. Their eyes were free from the strange fog, their smiles no longer forced. Maggie had freed them. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt, pulling Ethan into her arms. The boy cried, trembling, whispering disconnected words. "The funny man," he sobbed. "He's gone." But had he really? Maggie felt a chill. Slowly, she turned to face the carousel's mirror, and there, on the dusty surface of the glass, Grimley was looking at her, but something was different. His face no longer wore the grotesque smile. He looked sad. Grimley raised one of his hands and pointed at Maggie. She tried to look away, but the mirror cracked. A sharp sound, a growing fissure spread across the glass, and then the laughter came, low, hoarse, coming from within her. Maggie froze. The sound grew, echoed in her head, in her bones, in her soul. It was Grimley's laughter, and for the first time Maggie understood the truth. Grimley never wanted to be freed. He just needed someone to take his place. Maggie opened her mouth to scream, but only laughter came out. The fair continued its course. The lights shone once more. The children went back to their homes. And that night, as Maggie looked at herself in the mirror of her room, her reflection smiled before she did. The show never ends. It just finds a new star. 1 year later, the fair returned to Tulsa. This time, a new attraction was announced. Grimley's Laughter, the ghost clown of Tulsa Fair. An interactive show for the bravest visitors. At the entrance of the attraction, a large antique mirror reflected the faces of the curious who approached. But if they looked closely, they would see a figure in the background, a thin woman with hollow eyes and a smile too wide to be human. And if anyone stared for too long, they might swear the mirror smiled back. The show never ends, but your journey has only just begun. If you've made it this far, congratulations, but be careful. Some stories have a habit of following their readers. Now I ask you, would you have the courage to enter the Tulsa Fair? If so, sign up now to never miss a dark tale like this one. Turn on notifications and join the show. Comment below. Would you look in the mirror, or would you let the fair go on without you after all? The next star might just be you.